Welcome back to Revenge Plus, where revenge isn't just sweet, it's unforgettable. Let's dive into today's unforgettable story. You're just not smart enough to ever get promoted. That's what my boss said to me, word for word. His name was David Keller, VP of Marketing, Ivy League, white teeth, and a Rolex he kept flashing like it made him holy. I had just finished pulling an all-nighter finalizing a campaign that he would present to the board as his own. I walked into his office, coffee in one hand, folder in the other, fully expecting a good job, or at the very least, a nod of acknowledgement. Instead, I got that. He didn't even look up, just tossed the comment at me like a crumpled receipt, like I was the idiot who dared to dream too high. I stood there in silence for a second, something inside me cracked. But I didn't break, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the only thing keeping me from either throwing the folder at his head or breaking into tears. I turned around, walked out, and that's when it happened. That moment, that single, dismissive sentence became the start of something he would deeply regret. Because from that day on, I stopped trying to impress David, and I started planning how to replace him. It took 2 years, but I did it. Today, I run a firm that's taking clients straight from his hands. I sit across from board members he used to manipulate. I walk into meetings where his name used to open doors, and now it closes them. Funny thing is, he still doesn't know how I did it. He's too busy blaming the economy, his staff, his partners, everyone but the woman he once called just an assistant. Let me tell you a secret, people like David. They don't just underestimate you, they bet on you staying small. They need you to stay in your lane because if you ever stepped outside of it, you might actually outrun them. And that's exactly what I did. But to understand how it happened, we need to go back. Back to when I still believed in him. Back to the long meetings, the fake smiles, the silent sacrifices. Back to the moments when I thought that if I just worked hard enough, played nice enough, waited long enough, I'd get my shot. Spoiler, I didn't, because men like David don't promote potential, they fear it, they bury it. And when that doesn't work, they try to break it. But I had something he didn't, and a brain he never bothered to notice. I started watching, studying, taking notes not just on the job but on him, his habits, his mistakes. The way he lied, shifted blame, took shortcuts, and I waited. While he mocked me in meetings and called me kiddo in front of clients. Every insult was a match, and eventually I had enough sparks to start a fire. So let me ask you, have you ever been told that you're not enough? That you're too soft, too young, too naive, too something to ever make it big? What did you do with that moment? Did you believe them? Or did you start building your empire in silence like I did? Because I promise you, there's nothing more satisfying than watching someone choke on their own arrogance. When you show up not as their employee, but as their competition. And David, he never saw it coming, want to know how I did it. Let me introduce you to the man who thought he ruled the room. Let's talk about David Keller, and why people like him always think they've already won. David Keller wasn't born evil, he evolved into it, like mold in the dark. Like something that grows when no one holds it accountable. He started off charming, the kind of guy who remembered birthdays and handed out compliments like candy. That was how he lured people in, that's how he got me at first. "Mary, you've got potential," he'd said during my first month, smiling like a mentor. I believed him, but the compliments were just the hook. The poison came later, slowly, methodically. Let me tell you what David really was. He was the kind of boss who would ask you to stay late, then take credit for your work in the morning meeting. He was the kind of guy who'd praise your ideas in private, then call them immature in front of the board, just to remind you who the genius in the room really was. He laughed at people behind their backs. He flirted with interns. He made deals behind closed doors and blamed miscommunication when everything blew up. He weaponized charm like a scalpel. He made you doubt yourself with a smile. And worst of all, he made it look normal. The team feared him, not because he screamed, he didn't need to. He used silence, smirks, and subtle sabotage. Missed a deadline, that's on you. Got passed over for a raise. Must be something you didn't do right. Meanwhile, he took our best ideas and presented them as if they'd sprung fully formed from his overgelled head. He once told a coworker who asked for a promotion, "You're doing a fine job, let's not get greedy." And she apologized to him. That's the kind of psychological chokehold he had over people. And me, I was no different. At least not in the beginning. I stayed late. I made his coffee. I double-checked his reports, fixed his typos, covered for his unavailable calendar slots when he was out golfing. And still, I was invisible. One time during a major client presentation, I built the entire pitch deck, slide by slide, story by story. I had rehearsed with David 3 nights in a row. On the day of the pitch, he walked in, used my words, my layout, my data, and didn't even look at me once. Afterward, when the client signed on, he high-fived another guy on the team. He didn't even nod in my direction. That night, I went home and deleted all the old voice memos where he'd called me brilliant and a rising star. Because I finally saw him for what he was, a thief, a liar, a coward in a suit, but I wasn't just angry. I was awake, and once you wake up to someone like David, you start seeing the patterns. He had a rule: no one got too close to power except him. The moment someone got too good, too respected, too valuable, he found a way to cut them down. He'd whisper doubts about them to the board. He'd change project assignments last minute. He'd overwork them, overwhelm them, and then quietly push them out. And every single time he smiled. But here's what he didn't know. While he was busy trying to keep me small, I was watching, learning, and waiting. Waiting for the moment when I'd no longer need his permission, when I'd no longer need his approval, when I'd become so undeniable that no one could ignore me again. People say revenge is petty, but what if it's justice in disguise? What if some people don't learn until they lose everything they thought they owned? Do you know how many times I nearly quit? Do you know how many nights I lay in bed wondering if he was right, if maybe I really wasn't enough? But then I'd remember that look on his face when he dismissed me. The smirk, the arrogance. Like I was just another disposable assistant in a long line of nobodies. And something in me would whisper, "Not yet, stay, watch, wait." Because karma doesn't always come knocking. Sometimes you have to build the door yourself. So I started doing exactly that. I stopped trying to be his star employee. I stopped trying to be liked. I started building something of my own, piece by piece. But that's a story for the next part, because before I could break free, I had to find out just how deep his game really went. And what I discovered, it wasn't just workplace politics, it was betrayal, and secrets that could burn everything down if you knew where to look. So, want to see how I turned the tables? Let me show you what happens when the not smart enough assistant starts playing her own game. The plan didn't come to me all at once. It was more like a slow, steady drip, a leaky faucet of fury that filled a cup I didn't even know I'd been holding. But one night, after another long day of invisible labor and false smiles, I got home, poured myself a glass of cheap red wine, and sat down at my kitchen table with an old notebook, the kind with a soft leather cover and slightly frayed edges. I opened to the first blank page and wrote, "If I were CEO tomorrow, what would I do differently?" It wasn't a declaration, it was a question, but it was the start. What followed were nights spent sketching out systems, branding ideas, organizational structures, client strategies, partnership models, even color palettes. At first, it was just a thought exercise, a quiet rebellion, a way of reclaiming some part of my brain that corporate monotony had smothered. But slowly, that notebook became something else. It became blueprints, not just for a business, but for an escape, for a reinvention, for war. I started waking up early, earlier than anyone I knew, just to research markets, study case studies, listen to startup founders, watch investor pitch videos. While David was busy flirting with the VP of sales over overpriced sushi, I was binge reading Harvard Business Review articles and learning the language of capital. I even enrolled in an online strategy bootcamp under a fake name. I didn't want anyone from the office to know I was doing it. My weekends, once filled with errands and exhaustion, became laboratories. I tested branding concepts, built mock websites, cold emailed professionals on LinkedIn just to understand how they'd scaled their operations. But it wasn't just theory. I had something real: contacts. Relationships I had built under David's nose. Clients who liked me more than they liked him but were too afraid to say it out loud. Freelancers who trusted me because I always paid them on time, even when David forgot. Vendors who whispered frustration over delays and mismanagement, but always lowered their voices when he entered the room. I started keeping track. I built a separate contact list. I categorized people not by title but by trust, by how real they'd been when no one was watching. And then I started listening for leaks. You see, David had a weakness, a massive one. He couldn't shut up. He loved the sound of his own voice so much that he never noticed what he was giving away. In meetings, during drinks, even on speakerphone calls with investors, he leaked timelines, budgets, client concerns, expansion goals. I didn't even need to dig. All I had to do was sit close enough, take careful notes, and never let him realize I was the one holding the map to his entire empire. There was one moment I'll never forget. He'd just closed a deal with a luxury retail brand, and he walked into the office like he'd landed on the moon. He called an impromptu team meeting and ranted for 20 minutes about how branding is dead, and we're gonna teach them how to sell identity, not just product. But what caught my attention was something else. He casually mentioned a 6-month exclusivity clause that limited their market collaborations. And just like that, a window opened. I wrote it down, every word. I was no longer an employee. I was a ghost in his machine. A shadow that learned every weakness, every overreach, every arrogant move that could one day be turned back on him like a mirror. But I knew information wasn't enough. I needed leverage, I needed proof, so I started collecting. Emails, voice notes, calendar changes, presentation drafts, contracts edited minutes before meetings, recordings of late-night rants he forgot I could hear from the hallway. Every time he stole credit, I logged it. Every time he lied to a client, I documented it. Every time he belittled someone, I wrote it down, time, date, witnesses. I was building a file, not for HR. I knew better than to trust them. They played golf with David on Fridays. No, this wasn't for justice. It was for positioning, for power. And still, he didn't see me. One time, he asked me to fetch his dry cleaning because you're the most reliable person on this floor. I smiled, nodded, and then spent that trip recording a voice memo about a potential brand strategy that would one day become the foundation of my first client contract. He thought I was running errands. I was building an empire in secret, in silence, in plain sight. And here's the best part, I wasn't alone. There were others like me, overlooked, undervalued, underpaid. I started reaching out discreetly to designers, analysts, former employees who had quietly left with more knowledge than they let on. We started meeting at cafes, co-working spaces, library study rooms. It wasn't a company. Not yet, it was a conspiracy, a quiet one, but it was growing. And through it all, if that revenge hit just right, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic comebacks and justice-served stories. Drop a comment below, I'd love to know what you would have done in their place. I kept that notebook. It became stained with coffee and notes and hope, each page bolder than the last. I started ending each entry with the same phrase. He doesn't know what's coming, because he didn't. David thought he was playing chess, but he didn't realize the board had changed. This wasn't a game anymore, it was a takeover. And you know what's terrifying to a man like David? Not someone who yells, not someone who sues, not even someone who threatens, but someone who waits, someone who learns, someone who watches you dig your own grave and simply takes note of where the shovel is. I didn't need to attack. I just had to be ready. And when the first crack appeared in his armor, a botched campaign, a disappointed client, a public fumble, I didn't flinch. I smiled, because I knew the time was coming. I wasn't just going to survive this place. I was going to eclipse it. But before that moment came, I had to sharpen the final piece of the plan, the strike. The move that would shake his world from the inside where he'd never expect it. Something he couldn't undo. Something so precise, so clean, so undeniable that even he would finally have to look me in the eye and know he lost. So here's the question I kept asking myself late at night. If the person who underestimated you held the power today, what would you do to make sure they don't tomorrow? Because sometimes the best revenge isn't in what you say. It's in what you build. And I was building something no one could stop. Especially not David Keller. The first move wasn't loud. It wasn't even visible. I didn't storm into meetings or slap down evidence or demand anyone's attention. That's not how you take down someone like David. You don't attack the throne. You chip away at the legs until it collapses under its own weight. So I started with the clients. Quietly, one by one, not the biggest ones, those would come later. I reached out to the smaller accounts, the ones David routinely neglected, the ones he dumped onto junior staff, the ones who hadn't heard from him in months except for a templated invoice. I sent them emails, nothing flashy. Just a soft reintroduction. Hi, this is Mary. We worked together briefly on your spring campaign. I've recently begun consulting independently and I thought of you first. No one ignored me. In fact, more than one replied within the hour, not just curious but eager. They remembered me. They remembered how I fixed their requests late at night when David went silent. They remembered how I caught the typo before print, how I followed up after the project closed, how I listened. And now, suddenly I wasn't just the assistant, I was the one they trusted. It felt small at first. Like tossing pebbles at a glass wall. But then one client left his retainer contract with David's firm 2 months early and quietly signed a one-off with me. Then another asked if I could take over their rebrand, under the table, of course. Within 3 weeks, I had 4 clients, 2 NDA contracts, and my first true income stream, all while still working under David's nose. I was stealing from his garden while he was too busy polishing his ego. He didn't notice right away. That's the thing about people like him, they assume power is permanent. He still had the office, the team, the title, but what he didn't have anymore was the momentum. The next hit came during a quarterly client presentation. David was late, as usual, and I was asked to stall. So I did. I walked them through the numbers. I explained the insights. I showed them what really worked and what was just noise. For 20 straight minutes, I had their full attention. And then David walked in, late and unprepared, and tried to reclaim the room. It didn't work. One of the clients, a CFO from a fashion startup, actually turned back to me mid-meeting and asked, "Mary, what would you recommend for our summer campaign?" David's jaw clenched. I could see it from the corner of my eye. But he smiled, of course he did. He laughed and said, "Mary's got a good eye for detail. We trust her for the numbers." But everyone in the room could feel it, the shift. I wasn't just the assistant anymore, I was the expert. That's when I started turning up the heat. I leaked a small story to a niche industry blog, a little scoop about a growing wave of talent quietly leaving bloated marketing firms for leaner, independent creative collectives. It didn't mention David. It didn't have to. His peers recognized the profile instantly. He read it the next morning and stormed into the office in a rage, waving his phone around, ranting about traitors and gossip blogs and people biting the hand that feeds them. I sat there typing, eyes calm. He didn't even glance at me, he still didn't see it, but his voice was louder than usual. His hands shook. The cracks were showing, and then came the moment I had been waiting for. An RFP, request for proposal, came in from a brand David had been trying to court for months, a high-end eco-fashion label. He had boasted about them during happy hour, swearing he was about to land them, promising they were just waiting on the paperwork. I knew someone on the inside. I'd helped her during her transition from PR into branding, coached her on portfolio strategy, helped her with resume tweaks. She reached out to me, almost shyly, asking, "Hey, would you ever consider submitting a proposal? We've had some concerns about the other firm's transparency." I didn't hesitate. I built the cleanest, sharpest, most compelling proposal I'd ever written, grounded in data, soaked in empathy, surgically strategic. I didn't mention David, I didn't have to. A week later, I got the contract. David never saw the email, but he felt it. He started holding emergency team meetings. He began micromanaging, something he swore he'd never do. He demanded full access to all campaign files, restructured the junior team, fired the temp who once complimented my pitch in front of the team. But the more he tried to control, the more chaotic it became. Because the truth was this, he wasn't being attacked. He was rotting from the inside. I was just the mirror. And with every client I took, every subtle move I made, every moment I outshone him without saying a word, I took something from him that he couldn't get back. His image, his control, his illusion of being untouchable, and it was only the beginning. Because next I wasn't going to play under the table anymore. I was going to drag the game into the daylight. And I had one final card to play, one that had been hiding in plain sight the whole time. Do you want to know what happens when you record everything and keep receipts? Let's just say, some lies don't survive the light. It was never about dragging David into court. Not at first. I didn't care for legal battles or dramatic takedowns. I wanted distance. Autonomy, success on my terms. But the problem with narcissists like him is that the more power they lose, the more reckless they become. And David was unraveling. He started calling clients late at night, asking if they'd been approached by competitors. He grilled staff in meetings, watching their eyes for signs of betrayal. He even accused the finance lead, a woman who had worked with him for 10 years, of leaking numbers. I watched him implode, but I kept my mouth shut. Because I already had everything I needed. For over a year, I had been documenting his lies. Not in a dramatic, cloak-and-dagger way, just steady, meticulous record-keeping. Voicemails he left blaming interns for his missed deadlines. Emails where he borrowed client decks I had created and forwarded them with his name in the metadata. Slack messages full of condescension and veiled threats. Contracts adjusted at the last minute, always favoring his commissions. I had screenshots, timestamps, cross-referenced client records. And then came the day he finally crossed the line, not in private, not in secret, but in full view of the wrong person. A mid-level account manager had made a small mistake on a launch calendar. David, under pressure, exploded in a team meeting. Red-faced, jaw clenched, he slammed his hand on the table and yelled, "If you can't handle this, then maybe we don't need you at all." The room went dead. She blinked hard, stood up, and left without a word. The next day she didn't come back. The day after that she filed a formal complaint and she copied me, not by accident. That's when I knew it was time. I contacted a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, one of the best workplace litigation attorneys in the city. She had a reputation for being calm, brilliant, and absolutely lethal in depositions. I brought her everything. Labeled folders, audio files, archived emails, and when she was done reading, she looked at me and said, "This isn't a complaint, this is a case, a big one." I didn't want money, I didn't even want an apology. What I wanted was the truth on paper under oath where David couldn't smirk his way out of it. So we filed. A quiet, surgical legal motion, breach of intellectual property, abuse of authority, willful misrepresentation of authorship. Every campaign he'd stolen from me, every document he'd passed off as his, every time he'd manipulated records to frame others and protect himself. The moment the papers were served, everything changed. I wasn't a whisper anymore. I wasn't a rumor or a departure he could spin. I was a threat, official, documented, undeniable. He tried to spin it, claimed I was bitter, jealous, that I was nothing without his mentorship. But the lawsuit included timelines, audio clips, chain of custody logs, and worst of all, clients who were willing to speak up. One client submitted a sworn affidavit describing how David had told her I was just a note taker, even as I had run 90% of their launch strategy. Another confirmed that I had handled the media buying process that David took full credit for in an investor call. He panicked. In less than a week, his lawyers tried to negotiate a settlement. Quiet money, confidentiality. A clean exit, but I refused. I wanted the hearing. I wanted the transcripts. I wanted the truth in writing where no version of him could twist it into something else. When we sat in the deposition room, he didn't look at me. Not once. His tie was crooked, his eyes twitchy. He stammered over simple questions. My lawyer, calm as ice, walked him through his own emails he had forgotten existed. And when we played the audio of him berating a junior designer and then bragging, "She'll still stay late, they all do," he actually looked like he might vomit. That was the moment I knew he had lost. Not just legally, but narratively, because his story, the one where he was the genius, the leader, the misunderstood boss, had shattered. He wasn't in control anymore. The record was. And here's the part that shocked even me. After the deposition, 2 people from his company reached out to me. One asked for advice on leaving. The other offered to testify, not for revenge, for closure. David had ruled by fear for so long, he never imagined what would happen if fear stopped working. The case didn't go to court. It didn't have to. The firm offered me a full public acknowledgement of authorship for every campaign in question, formal apologies signed by the board, and a settlement sum so large even my lawyer raised an eyebrow. I took the acknowledgement, I took the apologies, but I turned down the money. Because David always believed power was in owning the purse. I wanted to show him real power is owning the truth. And now, the world finally knew who I was. Not Mary the assistant, not Mary the girl in the meetings. But Mary strategist, builder, threat. David thought he had buried me. He didn't realize I had been documenting the grave. So what do you think someone like him does after that? After losing everything he built on stolen credit, let's just say it wasn't a graceful fall. David didn't fall all at once. Men like him rarely do. They crack, then crumble in phases. First came the material losses. Contracts vanished. Clients pulled out quietly, citing strategic realignment. Investors stopped replying. His office, once filled with energy and the smug echo of his voice, grew silent. The firm restructured within weeks. David was moved into an advisory role, which is corporate for please go away. His corner office, gone. The assistant he used to bark orders at, now reporting to someone else entirely. Then came the reputational collapse. Word spreads fast in our industry. People love a comeback story, but they adore a downfall, especially when it's earned. Conference invitations dried up. Panels replaced him with fresher voices. That industry award he used to boast about, revoked after a quiet review of originality concerns. He tried to post motivational quotes on LinkedIn for a while. No one liked them, but the final blow was internal, spiritual. I saw it in his eyes during our last encounter. He looked smaller, paler, not humbled, just hollow. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they realize the applause isn't coming back. And the worst part? He still didn't understand how it happened, because he never thought someone like me could do this. I didn't build my company to prove David wrong. I built it to prove myself right, but proving him wrong was a satisfying bonus. In the months after the legal settlement, people I never expected started reaching out quietly, cautiously at first. Former colleagues, clients, even people who had watched the chaos from afar but never knew how to speak up. They didn't call it revenge, they called it relief. What I'd done wasn't just about taking something back. It was about showing others what was possible when you stop waiting for permission and start rewriting the rules. And that's exactly what I did. On the front page, under that first scribbled question, I've added a new line in ink. You are allowed to outgrow people who once knew a smaller version of you. And that's what this really was, not just revenge. Evolution. I started mentoring, too, something David never did, because to mentor someone means to believe they might one day surpass you. I speak at women in leadership panels. I sit on startup judging panels. I answer DMs from young professionals trying to leave toxic jobs. And when I meet someone who reminds me of myself, hungry, unsure, underestimated, I tell them what I wish someone had told me. You're not too much, they're just not enough for you. But here's the part no one talks about. After you win, there's silence. A strange, unfamiliar calm. No one's trying to sabotage you, no one's stealing credit. No one's telling you to stay in your lane. And in that silence, you have to decide what now, because it's not enough to destroy a broken system. You have to build something better in its place. So that's what I've been doing, David. I haven't heard his name in months. I suspect he's still out there somewhere trying to claw back relevance, trying to find someone else to blame. But he's no longer part of my story. He's just the prologue. Because the real story started the moment I realized I never needed his approval. I just needed to stop asking for it. Now, every time I walk into a room where people used to ignore me, I walk in with quiet certainty. Not louder, not angrier, just undeniable. And sometimes, after a long day, I sit in my office, the one I designed myself, with windows that overlook the city I used to feel trapped in, and I open that notebook. I flip through the pages, full of dreams that once felt impossible. And I smile, not because I beat him, but because I became me. And if you're still sitting in that meeting room, still waiting to be seen, still wondering if you're the problem, let me tell you something no one else will. You don't need to change yourself to fit into a broken system. You can walk away. You can build your own. So here's my question for you. What are you building quietly while they're underestimating you? Because one day they'll look up and realize they were never the main character in your story. You were. And you always have been.